This is my top 10 must-read books of 2025. Good morning, my name is Karen. I am a book Libra and I like to explore all types of books. I've tried to kind of group these in related kind of categories, but there's only 10 books, so let's just go on. Every year since my daughter was born, I have set a list of 10 books that I must read. These are my priorities. These are the ones that I most am excited for, that I feel like I need to read that year. One of my big goals for the year is to get back into fantasy. I have a whole series that I want to do, and it's called The Return of the Queen, because I'm a big fantasy reader, but in the last few years I just haven't been reading fantasy. I have been researching things that people say are the best fantasy around. Now, I do already know my taste, so I do know that there are books that are just not going to fit in what I want to read. This isn't like I'm delving into fantasy for the first time. Without further ado, let's get into the first fantasy book. This is the third year in a row that Richard Swan is making my list. The first time, it was The Justice of Kings. I watched so many people's video of their favorite books of that year, and because so many people said The Justice of Kings, I blindly bought this book and instantly devoured it. So then, last year, I read the second book, The Tyranny of Kings. Nope, not The Tyranny. The Tyranny of Faith. Sorry. And I adored this one as well. It was not as high as the first book, but I still loved it nonetheless. There is something so compelling about his writing. So this year I'm going to be reading The Trials of the Empire. This is a Germanic empire. It reminds me a lot of that sort of area in Europe. We are following a justice who is essentially like a judge, and he kind of goes around and delivers the law. And we have just entered a time in which the empire is failing. There are a lot of threats to the throne. There are kidnappings. There are betrayals. The whole justice system is crumbling, and this one justice, everything that he once believed is now crumbling. And we get it from the perspective of his clerk. And she is the best narrator for this story, and she is quickly becoming one of my most favorite fantasy characters ever. And this, I hope, will become one of my favorite trilogies ever. Second on my list is the Gormenghast trilogy. Now, I'm just going to say Titus Groan, the first book, technically is the book that I have on my top 10, but look, if I could finish the whole trilogy, this is the whole trilogy, I would love that. In reading the Wikipedia page and watching other people's reviews of this, there is some debate about whether or not this is fantasy. And I would like to understand why. This follows the castle Gormenghast, and it's ancient traditions. This is like, it is towers and rooms that have been built on rooms for 72 generations. And there are, so far, I actually started reading this. So far, it is following one man as he kind of goes through the castle and introduces us to the very intricate, complex systems that are in place. So I just read the part where he was in the kitchens and the complex system of keeping the fires stoked and all of the cook boys and the chef and everything that's going on there. And it seems to be a very atmospheric read, and I love the writing. It is so wonderful. And this is deemed as gothic, which I love. This has been on my list for years and years and years, and now it is a priority for 2025. In the same vein as the Richard Swan book, I watched a number of people's best fantasy books, and this one came up time and time again, and here we go. It is The Grace of Kings, another chunky book, but I'm so excited. I'm so excited because if I love this one, I get to read 3 more books in this series. And from what I hear, each book is just magnificent. And I cannot wait. Like Return of the Queen, bring me back to the fantasies that made me feel like a kid again. I have no idea what this book is about. I'm going in blindly. I have no clue. I have watched people's reviews of it and I still don't know what it's about, and I don't care because I am so ready to get into this. A series that I have been meaning to read, would love if I finished it, but I'm only putting the first book on, and that is Betrayal in Summer. Nope. Shadow in Summer. This is 2 books in one, and then these are the other 2 books in one. So it's a quartet. It's another series of 4. But from what I hear of this series, it is one that you kind of need to read all 4 books to get the full scope of the world and the message that is being given. I have read the first chapter of this book. I read it years ago. I even made a video where I read the first chapter, and it reads quite slowly. I do remember it reading quite slowly. So when I feel like I'm ready to read a slower fantasy, and maybe it's just slower because it's that adjustment of getting used to terms in a different world and different names, and you're just trying to like wrap your head around what's going on because it feels very different. So maybe it's just that. But I really, really wish and hope to read at least the first book this year. And my last fantasy is the Samantha Shannon, book 5 of the Bone Season series. Like, what is this series even called? I love book 1. I've read it twice. Book 2 is one of my top books of all time. I loved it, the mime order. I sort of fell a little bit meh on book 3. Book 4, the action was like non-stop and I loved it. So I'm really excited to be continuing in this world with book 5, The Dark Mirror. This is following Paige. She is a, what do they call it? A psychic, a sensitive? She's got some sort of psychic thing. There is some sort of evil group of people that have taken over England, and it's this really odd sci-fi futuristic England, and every psychic is sort of taken and put in a concentration camp that used to be a university. But it's kind of a cool world, so like I'm really excited to get back into it. There is romance, obviously. So I'm looking forward to this one this year. This one comes out on this day. So I have a tag on that for my library. As soon as it comes in, I'm reading it. Next, we're going to get into classics. You knew it was coming, Charles Williams. This is my first reread of Descent into Hell. I think this is my favorite out of all of his 7 novels. But again, it has been since 2018 that I have read this book. So we shall see. I remember the ending being very devastating, and I think that's why it was my favorite. I really adored the themes in this one. I know there is a doppelganger. Like, can you imagine walking down the street and you meet yourself? What would you do? What would you do? So there's doppelganger, there's succubi, there is Lilith, there is Descent into Hell, and there's a very charismatic playwright in this one. So I look forward to rereading this one. Short stories. This is Chekhov, as in the Chekhov's gun metaphor. The reason why this came on my radar is my aunt is a writer of short stories, and she has always said that he is a master at writing short stories. So I saw this in the bookstore and I thought, sure, why not? 52 short stories, I could get through that in a year, one a week. Sounds great. And this doesn't look like 52 short stories, but here's the great thing, is that these short stories are literally short stories, like 2 pages. They're very short, they're very digestible, they do make you think, and that is what a short story does. A short story is just a capture of a moment. It's just a little bit of a snapshot of an emotion or of a time and space. And I'm really enjoying so far. I've read like 3 or 4 and I love them already. Some more short stories. I have Time Travelers. This is a Canadian published diaspora of Palestinians. It's got that viewpoint that we don't always get in stories, and I am very intrigued by it. I loved the title, and it just intrigued me. It's a very short book, but I'm really into the short stories right now, and this is not a perspective that I normally get to read from, so bring it on. And my last 2 books are both nonfiction. The first one being A Garden Against Time. If you've been here a while, you've seen my year that I just did last year. I vlogged it and I kind of brought you along my first year as a flower farmer. It did not go to plan, but it didn't not turn out. So I started finding books about gardening, but also like fiction and nonfiction, and just bringing the 2 things that I love together, books and gardening. This one is following the author as she restores an 18th century garden, and she thinks a lot about what a garden means, not as an escape from the world, but a way to immerse yourself in it and learn from it. I'm very fascinated by this one. Also, I love the color, just the poppy yellow, just fantastic. The very last book that I have on my list is not necessarily one I want to read last. It's just the way that this worked out. If you're on Libby and you look up this book, there is an insane wait list for it. So I'm really glad that I bought the physical. I listened to a podcast with the author before I even knew he had this book coming out, and him and Rainn Wilson talking. Now, I read a book by Rainn Wilson called Soul Boom 2 years ago, and that one's all about the idea of why our society is so depressed and anxious, and we're missing something. And his angle is that we are lacking spirituality, a belief in something higher, and that's his sort of viewpoint on it. So he's interviewing this author who wrote The Anxious Generation. And this author is very intelligent, and he has quite a handle on, I think it's Gen Z that he's talking about, but it could apply to millennials as well. I'm a millennial. It's all about how social media has affected us and why it's created this sort of mass anxiety. And it was a Goodreads choice. I don't know if it won, but I saw it on there and I was like, sure, I am interested in this. I think it is valuable. I think it is important, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading this one. This one will be fantastic. There you have it. Those are my top 10 reads for 2025. My name is Karen. I'm the Book Libronaut. I explore all types of books, this year's focus being fantasy, but as always, many different things. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year. We'll see you again soon. Bye.